The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the hosts' past, present, or future employers. Hello, hello, welcome back. It is Brian and Mr. Betcher and Ms. Berlin for Breaking Down Security.
Hello.
Oh, he's giving me the silent treatment.
No, there we go. It's very, I'm very confused. It's not dark outside and we're podcasting.
Oh. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
It's my nap time.
Nap time? Oh, he's a little tie-tie. He's a nappy poo. He's getting caffeinated,
oh my.
So that's cool. Yeah, welcome back, everybody. This is, of course, Breaking Down Security, and we are doing another interview, which is great because sometimes it's your drought or you're flooding. You either don't have any interviews or it's like interviews out the yang. So
I'm just always happy when we don't have to talk about news.
Right. And there's great podcasts out there that do that, and I love defensive security. Oh, wow. It's going to be a few weeks before they hear this, so, Jerry and Andy, love y'all.
They make fun of me enough as it is. I can poke fun at them sometimes.
That's true. Yeah. So, we've had, a lot of great discussions, and we're going to have a lot more in the coming years. And this week, we're going to be talking to Conor Sherman. A little background here. I was doing a team thing at my organization. We do a lot of things to try to maintain our mental health. We get goodie bags and goodie boxes, and we had Dr. Dan Diamond come in and talk about trying to do team building. We did some team building and such, and one of the quotes that he gave us, which actually hit home for me, it was kind of interesting, was one from author Viktor Frankl, and it said, "Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." And that's from Man's Search for Meaning, which we're not going to be talking about what that book's contents was about, which I've heard it's an excellent book. But when I heard this, the first thing I thought of from a security point of view was incident response. And, this is exactly where we come from. It's like there's stimulus that requires us to make a response, and there's a bit of a space there where it's like, oh, do we want to, declare a response? What do we declare our response? And then, we grow and we learn from that and we continue on and we get better. So we've had Conor, we've been trying to get Conor on for a while. He does incident response, and the last time we tried to get him on, he had an incident response. So like with Miss Berlin, customers come first, family comes first, podcast comes second. So we were very happy to have Conor join us this week on Breaking Down Security. We're going to talk a little bit about incident response. So welcome, Conor, to the show. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. As you mentioned, it has just been a long time coming. It's just like we try and get all schedules, get on the calendar. And then, of course, the adversary has a vote as well. So I really appreciate the effort and the diligence to finally make this happen. So thank you for having me today.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you came from, how you got to be where you're at today.
Thank you. Yeah. So my career has been focused in building and running security programs for financial services organizations or high-tech firms, and then in the middle, consulting to both of those. I think you have to have been dropped as a child to really dig and say, I want instant response as my life. I really wanted to be a blue teamer here, because it is just, there's so much all the time. But with that, we get really exciting problem sets and challenges. I like to tell people it's kind of like solving a Rubik's Cube that fights back. It is exciting, good work. So I've been in this place for a while now. And, so my journey started when I was really getting into financial services in the Boston area. I seemed to kind of call that home, and was there for about 5 years, was in New York for 5 years, temporarily now in North Carolina, but slowly making my way back over to Boston. And through this journey, just have really fallen in love with helping people and organizations bring clarity and calm to the time when it is most stressful, right? When you've got an adversary knocking at your door, if you are not prepared for that, that can really put you back on your heels. So building out strong incident response programs and making sure that there is this idea that all the way from the engineer up to the executive, that there is planning, that there is run books, that there is preparation that is done for the inevitable, right? And then when that happens, I really love that quote you said, Brian, from Viktor Frankl, and being deliberate in that space, right? So in that moment of instant response. So yeah, you asked me how I got started. I think one of the things that my dad used to say growing up was this phrase that he learned from his dad, because my dad's English and my grandfather was in the English armed forces, and they had this phrase: prior preparation and planning prevents poor performance. And there was, well, coming from the military, there's a few other P's in there.
There's more words in there, right?
There are. I'm going to edit those out for the audience. But that phrase really kind of tells you what you need to know about instant response, is that if you can have this prior preparation and planning and training and all of that, we can prevent an event of poor performance, which is responding. So I came to security like many other people. Angsty teenager discovers Linux. And I was like, okay, this is fun. Okay, I know what I'm going to do for the rest of my career now. And just diving into that. But what kind of drew beyond the intellect, but what drew me to it was a sense of confusion people had around technology. They thought that this was an area of abuse and people didn't know how to respond or protect themselves in that space. And so that other kind of human element to me is what's kind of kept me going for these last 10, 15 years, is really just connecting at that level. So I got started in my career, got going. And then when I was early days on support desk, I discovered a new variant of malware. And it wasn't like that particularly sophisticated. We ended up calling it, and there's some SANS article out there, and they gave me credit for those guys, the Storm over in Storm Center, eons ago. Because I submitted it and I was all proud as like a 22-year-old, like, hey, I found something really neat and cool. But effectively I called this the Greenpeace malware, as it was an attack against Greenpeace because they're always saving the planet, which is, wonderful and noble. And what the adversary had done is they sent a botch command to the malware. The malware had moved the executable to the print spooler, a driver, and for a print server. So thus, all the printers in the office tried to print the executable code, and it just ran out of paper everywhere. So every printer across the space just ran out of paper because it just printed garbage, and hence the sarcastic nickname I gave it when I was 22. So that when I kind of got that going, I'm like, yeah, this is fun. Like, this is where you need to be, is dealing with this stuff. And then since there, adventures have ensued.
Very nice. Okay. Ms. Berlin, this was suggested by you, so I would love for you to go ahead and ask the first question.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, Conor and I met like 6 years ago, maybe.
Sounds about right.
Something like that. Yeah, he was when I was doing other less cool sim work.
You were helping me, company. So I appreciated it.
Conor was actually one of my only engaged customers.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
And that's always a bright spot in people's work day, when you can actually work with somebody that cares about security. So yeah, I mean, where should we even start? We want to talk about different IR stories, and do you have like any favorite like?
I think yeah. Things? So let's talk about a good favorite story of mine.
Yeah.
You talk about the narrative of the story. The punchline is focus on the basics. Like, do the basics well, and life will be better for you, right? Yep. I saw once there was a presentation at some security conference, and it gave us two photos, and it was a Mario Kart where you had to jump over one thing, a Mario Brothers, and he jumped over one thing, and ta-da, he won, and it was super easy. And the other one was like super complex, and there's like daggers and danger and all this stuff. And it's like, which environment is yours for the adversary, right? Is it like super easy, they just hop over one box and then they win, or do they have to get through 10 or 12 different layered defenses and controls? So the moral of this story, children, is patch, takes RDP servers off the internet, and don't have default credentials. Okay, so I've already spoiled it. So I was working with, back in my consulting days, had a client, and they called in and they said, we have this .crypto file on our on our primary system that hosts our SQL database, and all of our stores, they phone in and they get their updates from this particular server. So why do you only have one server supporting like your entire technology infrastructure? For the love of God, like that was a bad idea. So we get in there, and what we found is that what brought their attention to it was that the SQL service kept stopping, and they would go in there, they'd start it again, and the next day it would stop, and they'd be like, "What's going on?" And then they found this crypto file on there, and then they panicked and they called instant response, and we got in there, and we found it was, at the end of the day, we found that they FIN6, either FIN6 or FIN7 was what it was pointing to, as an organized crime unit, had just gone through and was really focused on stealing financial data. That's their MO. That's what they're after. And so we got into the environment and we realized step one, there was no logging anywhere. So there was no visibility, anything. So we're dropping the network sensors. We're turning on logging for the first time. The only policy that existed, the adversary had put in there to turn off any logging that might be there. So again, another indicator. And so we got in there, we took a look at the environment, and we could see that there was an open PowerShell running in memory. It was beaconing back. It was Cobalt Strike, and they were phoning home to a couple IP addresses. So now, thankfully, for those who are using Cobalt Strike as an adversarial technique, they tend, like FIN6, FIN7, they tend to not rotate their infrastructure a lot. They tend to have a couple IP addresses they phone home to. So once we found that, it was like, okay, great. What else is connected out to this space? And found our kind of initial round of compromised hosts. From there, you start to look at your identities. Okay, who's been logging into these things? Who's been making changes? Lo and behold, this particular thing came in either one of two ways. Because there was no logging, we don't have a definitive joke. Well, they had RDP servers that people were remoting into in their environment. So that was their remote access strategy, was just an open RDP server. And it didn't have any additional protections. And it also had administrator accounts. You could just log in. So if you guessed the password, which was easy to guess, you could get in with an admin box. Now, of course, this happens to be joined to a domain. And so when you got administrator, they actually gave the administrator account domain admin privileges. So that was one vector. So that's, again, a basic thing to get access control underway, but they didn't. So the adversary got in. And then in addition to that, we also saw that there was an local IT guy on the other side of the country who had compromised credentials. And we saw the adversary had taken his credentials and he had domain admin. So we know the adversary had domain admin in a few different places. So this was just one where we're walking through the client and we're like, okay, you have no logging. You have no sophisticated endpoint protections. They had something, but it obviously wasn't doing the job. Then they didn't have any network layer visibility. So as far as their infrastructure, they're just a sitting duck. And of course it hit at a time, and it's terrible when these things happen. And you just want to make sure that when it does happen and you've done that prior preparation and planning, that you have the visibility and the capability to do something about it. And this was a fun, engaging, exciting one because me and my team got to swoop in there and do the forensics and do the IR, do all the excitement. But the other side is you're going back to the customer and you're like, a little bit of investment up front would have saved you a very big incident response bill that you have, not just with us, but then also your cyber insurance company's now involved. You've got customers who are now involved, so on and so forth. So that was a good recent example of just like, even now people overlook the basics. And it's not to knock people. It's just like you got to line yourself up with your incentives, right? So sometimes you have IT teams who are just crushed, right? They're just focused on keeping the lights on, keeping that one SQL server running or whatever it is. And we forget that, there are adversaries they may forget that there are adversaries out there who also want this data, that it's not just IT who wants to keep it running, like the adversary wants it as well. So you are defending against an active somebody on the other side of that. So that was a fun recent example.
Cool. Okay. So you mentioned basic hygiene. Do you have any kind of specific list of things that you suggest? Or, we've talked about the CIS top 20 security controls as a basic hygiene method, knowing what's in your environment, what your software loadout is. You mentioned they had not very good EDR protection.
Nicely.
these are these some of the, we keep talking about quick wins, but I think a lot of the basic hygiene stuff can never be a quick win because of the amount of time and investment involved. So what are some of the basic hygiene things? Is it top 20 stuff, or is it, how do you frame that conversation if you're, the blue team going, hey, look, doom and gloom is going to happen at some point, and then your boss is like, well, it's not happening right now, so screw it.
Yes. Okay. That would be the absolute worst interpretation of Richard Branson's "screw it, let's do it." It's like, right? Some people are like, screw it, we'll get to that later. Yeah. It's like, no. It's like, we should take action. That's the moral of that phrase, right? We should take action to improve the environment. So, okay. So yes, a really good question. What are the fundamentals? Where should we be focused? And also, so I want to break that down into two different audiences. One is, okay, you're an executive and you don't have a security team, but you have a technology responsibility, right? So I'm going to just talk about how you may frame doing good hygiene there and why that's important. And then the second is the blue team, red team. So, and you do have a security team, but maybe you're understaffed and you're having a hard time getting the ball moving. So first one, I can't give enough love to CIS 20, right? I just keep it's so important. I wish everyone in the security community understood this, and those in the technology community understood this. It's like, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't reinvent the wheel. Just put the wheel on the cars and move forward. Like, don't reinvent the wheel. And it's just not because CIS 20 is some magical thing. Like, it's not. Like, it has plenty of gaps. It doesn't go far enough in product security. It's not helping you with code security. It's not helping you with those layers, but it lays you a foundation for secure infrastructure. Right. And if everything's built on your infrastructure, that's a really good place to start. So let's unpack that for a second. So as of July this year, CCPA went into enforcement. So if you're an executive and you have more than, I think it's 50,000 employees, excuse me, if you have more than 50,000 customers that are California resident, and there's one of the metric around how much revenue that you make. So it doesn't take much for CCPA to be a regulation that you have to pay attention to. Part of what CCPA and GDPR mandate, not suggest, not maybe someday, but they mandate, is that you have what's called a reasonable security program. Now, what they are saying is that for the size of organization you are, for the sensitivity of the data that you're holding, you should have reasonable security controls in place. Now, a lot of people say that's open to interpretation, Well, yes, it is, kind of by design, because we wanted every company is a little different. But if you don't know where to start, you can always go back. There's a really great quote out there. So Senator Kamala Harris, when she was the Attorney General in California, she said that the CIS 20 is a representation of what a reasonable security program looks like. That was her phrasing, not mine. So if you want to know where to start, the California Attorney General, who is in charge of enforcing this stuff when she had that office, she said CIS 20 was reasonable security. So if you needed the answers in the back of the textbook, that was it. So I really encourage executives to say, let's start with the basics. Let's get good infrastructure. Let's start with the CIS 20 and implement it as effectively as possible. Don't cram it in 3 months, but don't take a year and a half to get it done either. Walk through it and get it embedded, because there are, in addition to technology changes, there are process changes, and your company has a culture. And that culture has to be able to absorb that change, right? People have an elasticity. Cultures and companies have an elasticity. And when you introduce change, you kind of take up those elasticity points. If you take up too much, something snaps. So introduce it as quickly, but as effectively as possible. And that's for every company to decide what it is. But as an executive, remember, you've got both the state of California can come after you if you're not performing reasonable security. There are civil lawsuits, which can go up to $100 to $750 per record that can come after you. So we're talking millions of dollars very quickly in in security liability that's sitting on your table. So if you think about your company and all the risks that you're managing right now between COVID and shipping your product and engaging new customers and keeping the customers you also have a handful of multi-million-dollar risks sitting on the table with CCPA if you're not compliant. Now, one of the ways to greatly de-risk that is just implement the CIS 20 controls. It's not an overnight thing, but it's also not prohibitively expensive either. And by the way, by doing so, you position yourself to not deal with a breach, because all of that cost you now just de-risked, right? I think it was IBM report that came out said that the average the 2020 data came out, and it's like the average breach cost is $3.86 million was the average cost of the breach that they had investigated in their survey sample. So if you think about it, you can very quickly rack up like $10 million worth of liability that your company could be handling. And that's just a number out of thin air. Every company's different. But you can de-risk this really quickly by starting to implement things like basic hygiene, CIS-20, cloud configuration, so on and so forth. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer to a really simple question. But from an executive point of view, that's kind of like where I like to position the messaging, because that can get some real buy-in there, because there's real value to the company to do it that way.
And you talk about like the different elasticity points, right? Which is, I don't think I've ever heard it put that way. And I like that because like different portions of the CIS-20 are going to have a different amount of points. Mm-hmm. And to different people too. So you may be, I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I can't do asset management. It's going to take me two years to implement asset management. Well, but that's just like, that's 1 out of 20. Like you can't take 2 years for all 20 of these. How long is that going to take? You could do different pieces and parts of this to work towards that ultimate goal, in a shorter amount of time.
And if our goal as a security community is to ensure that companies, as within reason, don't get breached, now we can never get to 100%, but there is a sense of an asymptotic relationship between security investment and likelihood of breach. It never gets to 0, but you can continuously approach that and kind of drive that down. So there is this asymptotic relationship that we can work with it. So working within those boundaries. So our goal is to prevent, right? That's what we're really after. But your point, Amanda, it's like, well, where can we start? That is the lowest friction, the highest fruit. Well, we can start on the detection side at least. Let's bring visibility and observability into it. So I think it's like 6 of the 20 controls are actually put your logging on. Like they have different places and they want visibility in certain areas, but it's like just turn on logging, put it in a central place. At least when you get breached, you know how and where it came from and what the impact was. And so you can contain that up. Fun fact out of that data breach report, I think though, and you can correct me on this one, there was like a $300,000 breach cost reduction for teams that had a good incident response plan. Like, so the teams that had an incident response program and they practiced it via tabletops, and I infer that means up to the executive level. That's kind of how I run my programs. So there's the technical, the engineer to the executive. If you have that, like just that $3.86 million, it comes down by $300,000. It's not millions, but it's a good chunk of change that you don't have to spend. So go back to your CIS-20. It's like, let's start with the detection space at least. Right. And then we can kind of move this over to the protection space and just kind of walk that through.
And I'm all for the detection part.
I know you are. As I preach to the choir there. Well, it's like, let's give you a bunch of log data, do some threat hunting.
We talk about having those basics down, but I've done, 30 different engagements with companies, and one of the first things I asked because we need to define scope is, where's your asset list? And I don't think any of them have been able to give me a decent asset list. They'll run a Active Directory query real quick and give me a list of systems, but they've got systems in there that haven't reported in for 2 years.
Sure.
Right. And they have systems in there, obviously, that have never reported in because they were misconfigured in some way. So just the basics, like what do you have out there, isn't being done from my perspective. And so there's that. And but the people who do a decent job at the basics can have a lot of success when there is an incident, even if they don't have the fancy, whiz-bang products, right? So one engagement that I was not in personally, but a colleague of mine said that they did have the fancy EDR, millions of dollars spent on that product. They also had antivirus. They actually had 2 antiviruses, sometimes on the same systems, and they still weren't able to figure out what was going on because they didn't have their logging in place, like you said. So yeah, you can get a lot of success out there just doing the basics. You don't need the whiz bangs in order to get started on, okay, where did this come from? Like you said, do you see that as well?
Man, yes, we all know the answer to that question. It's like the struggle, the pain is real, the struggle is real. But I would also say, here's my glimmer of hope. Like, I always want to give people a sense of hope around this, is because just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, right? You know, getting up and going for a run in the morning, it's a pain when it's cold outside, but we know it's good for us, so we go and do it. Or eating our veggies. Yes, we should do more of that. We all know we should be doing these things. So to unpack that a little bit, like, one of the great things that's happened, now there's been this massive adoption of obviously SaaS, cloud services, and all of that. So SaaS services and such. And yes, there's been its own risks that have come with that, right? Data may not have the same controls. Identity access management has become a real thing as that's become the control plane, and we can unpack that as it relates to IR in a bit. But one of the hopeful things here is this: we've normalized, inadvertently, on a common infrastructure. So how you have these assets, how they're registered in AWS when you spin up that EC2 instance, that is the same for every company. So the market has replied and said, great, now we can hook into that over an API. We have asset to this. So the point here is, we've accidentally made our lives a little easier by shoving everything into the cloud and having it over a normalized data plane. So then you look at companies. Can I drop a company on the podcast? I have no affiliation. Can I just drop a vendor?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Cool. So there's companies like Umista and others out there. And what they do for asset management, and it's and what they do is they say, great, give me an API integration in all of your stuff, pull it in, and that's how you got integrations. So now that poor IT person isn't like trying to run around with a spreadsheet, which was like the old poor man's way of doing it. I mean, their software is not free and it's not cheap, but it's good stuff. What they do is they'll say, well, hook into your Okta, your Google, your AWS, your Jamf, your whatever, pull it all into one place. And you're getting closer to solving this problem, right? Like that Jamf, like, you got to make sure the agent's still installed on all the machines. Like, that work still needs to be done. But at least 80-20, you're getting most of your environment from all these different places and normalizing it. So it's hard. It's hard to get it complete. But if you kind of think about it as like, we have all these SaaS services, is there a way that we can bring these together via an API into a normalized place? I think that will be the winning path forward from an 80-20 principle.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just my thoughts, but you're absolutely right.
So we have some topics here. You had mentioned that you love everything as code. Governance as code, detection as code. How do you do governance as code? Is governance not the same as compliance, or
Yes.
what does that look like for you? I have a follow-on question depending on your answer.
Oh, God, the pressure is on. I'm like, okay, how am I going to game this one out? So basically,
totally off topic.
There you go. Thank you. So that Mario Brothers thing I was talking about a second ago, let's go back to that. No, let's unpack that. So yes, compliance and governance as code are very, very similar in my mind. What the point here is that when you have this normalized infrastructure like AWS, GCP, Azure, whatever cloud environment you're on, or whatever SaaS services you're using, when we try to tell people what to do via policies and documents and such, it doesn't work that well. We've known this for a long time. Like, they're important legal documents to have. They are technically, the policy control is technically a control. It sits within a control framework, but it's just not that effective of stopping the bad thing from happening. So where appropriate, it's best to take those do's and don'ts and write them into code and get that into the right control plane. So if you're a company that's shipping code and you make your product because you're a SaaS service or you're whatever, and you make your value is realized as a company with what you put through your CI/CD pipeline, well, let's put some freedom within limits there, right? Let's make sure that critical vulnerabilities, and this is not saying if people can do it overnight, you got to walk into this, but let's make sure that static code analysis, when it finds a critical vulnerability, doesn't let that code be merged into your production branch if it has a critical vulnerability. That statement would have lived in your vulnerability management policy. But if we can now integrate it into your CI/CD pipeline, that's, in my mind, that's governance as code. And it's either an enforcement mechanism where it just rejects the PR, or it's a notification to the developer, hey, you really shouldn't do this. and that's a company culture and risk tolerance decision to make. But then you start to get into things like, well, what if your AWS infrastructure is code, right? Terraform, wonderful. Well, let's put some Terraform policies and make sure that S3 bucket doesn't end up on the internet, or that all your snapshots have to be in an encrypted state. And if they're not, it doesn't even get released into production. You can't even merge that Terraform code. It gets spit back to the SRE. So that type of way of saying so I think this is really important for security teams, is like, stop thinking about yourself, start thinking about the consumers of this, in saying, if my SRE team is the people I'm trying to help make secure AWS environment, GCP cloud environment, whatever, what tool chain do they use? And how do I take the identification of these risks and these solutions that we've worked together on, put them in their day-to-day operations technically, such that they're getting notified the way they want to get notified. It's in Slack or PagerDuty, whatever the case is, or that merge is getting failed and there's good errors around it. Then that will work for some. And then you're going to talk to like your legal team who's adopting everything in Box. That's going to look very different on how you help do the governance as code there. So the point here is, let's find the teams who are consuming the data. Let's find the right control plane for those environments. And let's break down our aspirational statements, which are in policies, make them real, and integrate them into those data planes.
Cool.
Control planes.
Cool. Yeah, okay, that answers my question. So,
well, what about the follow-up question? I'm like waiting for this, man.
I do have a follow-up question, but it's
what's your thought on nachos?
No. Yeah, it's not like, aha, I got you. But so we work in environments where everything is code. We have developers doing things. You're talking about compliance and governance, and those are restrictions that these, 10x engineers that, want to push out all the code and make all the things. And those are restrictions that are being put on these developers. How do we get those developers to want to care about, oh yeah, I just want to set up this S3 bucket and put a bunch of shit in it. And the read-write thing, that's not a big deal. We'll just go ahead and put that out there. How do you get people in an environment to care, because the code is pretty much just policy saying, no, you can't do this. Or, because nobody ever says, oh yeah, we're going to put a policy in that allows everybody to do everything. From a security standpoint, we're locking things down, whereas the developers want to open things up. You mentioned culture. So it's definitely a cultural thing. We have to make people want to lock things down for the good of, whether it be their job, their livelihood, the company, the customers. So how do we motivate them to do that?
Okay, so that's not a question. That's a whole episode of the podcast.
I know, right?
Okay.
I know, right?
I do have a few thoughts on this because this is so important, what you just said. So there's a framing of the argument, and then there's the metric I want to highlight. Yep. So first and foremost, we were talking about this beforehand. Like, I also run a podcast, the Confident Defense podcast, and we also have Confident Defense Insights, where every Friday morning, James Chiappetta, who is the actual expert about the quote, he and I talk about the news, talk about some insights that are going on in the security space to make it available to people. They can find that on YouTube if they so care. He is on a mission to transform the way AppSec and developers work together, because this is really critical. So in some of his most recent Medium articles, he highlights the fact that for AppSec engineers, and this is not him giving these numbers, he's quoting he's referencing some industry analysis that's been done. AppSec engineers will tell you that 75% of them surveyed will tell you that there is a cultural divide from them trying to help the business, the developers who are writing this code, and the developers and engineers who are receiving this, right? There is just this clash, this systemic structural clash where engineers don't want to have to hear what AppSec people are saying, and they're fighting for a seat at the table. And then where if you talk to developers, like, hey, what's your perspective on security? 50% of them will tell you there's a cultural divide, and like 65% of them will say that just like AppSec people don't get the pressure that I'm under. I need to ship code. Like, my bonus, my paycheck is built on how many widgets I commit and how many PRs I do. And that's where I'm at. So you asked a really good question. And so I want to highlight that by saying that there is at this moment a complete cultural divide between security teams who are trying to put forth solutions and help the help the engineering team, and the engineers who are on the receiving this. And I think it comes down to what you referred to, Brian, as the framing of the argument you had, which was Security wants to lock things down and make things safe. Engineers want to open things up and get things moving. And so the only path forward can be this idea of freedom within limits. And I totally stole that when reading one of my books for one of the Montessori books for my son. Like I have a newborn, or going through all the parenting things, and I was reading the Montessori book, and they're like, freedom within limits. I'm like, this is what I've been looking for my whole career. And this is this idea that like AppSec and teams who are in charge of security, their job is to say, what are the no-go zones? When you're hitting the danger zone? Okay, if you're not in the danger zone, feel free to do what you need to do. And don't come to me for every single, security doesn't need to review every pull request. They just need to review the pull requests that have risk associated with it. And we've characterized what that looks like. Or where, we prevent that merge and that it goes back to the engineer, and the engineer knows why the merge failed. And they have to go, update that library, fix that code syntax, whatever the case is. So I think the only way for us as a community is to help fix this problem is to stop saying no and start saying, yes, here's how. And that's got to be the fundamental shift in everything that we do. That's my opinion.
No, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, we've had other folks on, and it's very much it seems like a cultural thing where it's like, either we've done it this way for the last, 10 years or, 5 if you're a startup. And, why do we need to change now? It's worked so far. And, you talking about framing the conversation, we're going back to incident response. If you can take a report like that IBM report, which I believe that's the one we have in the show notes dated July 29th, 2020, talking about, just doing X will save you potentially millions and millions of dollars if there's an actual, doing the basics is going to save you in the long run in time, effort, potential breach. Those are the kinds of things and ways you can frame your conversation with senior leadership or developers and saying, look, we're going to save $70 million a year if shit hits the fan and we have an incident response. This is going to, we'd rather save the 70 million on the back end or, on the front end versus, spending, $1,000 on the back end doing, asset management or, spending, I don't know how much ever it is for AWS to give you your asset management, through the CLI. So yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So to that point, I like to talk about incentives, right? Incentives drive human behavior. Humans make decisions based on the options available, and they choose the option with the most positive incentive. So that gotta be a negative or positive, but like that strong, whatever's pulling them one way or another. Right. So to that point, I would say that you need to have that. Everyone says executive buy-in. Okay, let's break that down. What does that mean? Dollars. Talk about the cost of a breach. Talk about what that's going to do to, like, there's financial rate, there's a financial impact, there's a brand impact, there's a customer churn impact, there's longevity in the marketplace. These are all things that are meaningful to the executives who are trying to build and grow this company. So that's how you start to frame that executive buy-in conversation. Then you turn around to the engineering team. And you're like, you don't want to be the guy or gal who committed that code that got us breached in the first place, or committed that Terraform that did that data leak via that S3 bucket or that RDS instance. So I would say you got to come from both top and bottom. And when you're coming from, think about the engineers, then we have to solve security like an engineer. And this is where like security stops becoming the office of no, but really starts to become solutions engineering for organizations. The ability for us to say, you have this problem set. I'm not going to tell you what to do yet. I'm going to step back, think about it like I'm developing a product for you as my customer. Then I'm going to step forward and say, okay, I think of the 3 options, we should choose one of these. What do you, engineer, want? What would make it better for your life? And have that two-way dialogue and be okay to be wrong. But think of it almost like you're a customer service orientation and your engineers are your customers. I think that framing really kind of helps change the dialogue, kind of turn down the temperature a little bit and make us more successfoung.
Very nice. Yeah. I'd never heard of the freedom within limits deal with the Montessori thing. So I would, was doing a little research on that. So that, we talk about guardrails. So security should be guardrails and not speed bumps or what have you. So that makes complete sense. We've talked about that before, but I can definitely see how this is, it's amazing how all the different things that we see in our lives equate to security versus.
It really does. Think about like safety features in the car. You are more likely to drive faster on the Autobahn if you know that you have a seatbelt, that you have airbags, if you have like that car can go faster and you can get more out of that car on the Autobahn if you've got the right safety features in place. If your doors are falling off and your wheels are wobbly and there's no safety features, I'm not taking that thing 100 miles an hour.
I don't know. I know some people that definitely still would.
Cool. And then we know what
But in
happens.
security, same thing.
And I think
the reason cars started being able to drive faster was not because they made the improvements in the engine. It was because they developed brakes, because the first cars didn't have brakes. So you couldn't drive very fast. Otherwise you couldn't stop.
I did not know that we released cars without brakes. That's mind-boggling. It's like, hey, we want to go. How do you stop? Well, you put the pedestrians in the way, and eventually, you hit enough of them, you'll get where you want to go.
The roads were so bad that they had so much friction, you would stop anyway, right? Over a few seconds.
I seen it when I was a kid. You stop with your feet, right?
Fred Flintstone style, yes.
Yeah, right. 100%. Yeah.
That's great.
Very funny. All right, so detection as code. Miss Berlin is, she's a big fan of detection and using SIM. How can you use detection as code when you're working, in your business? It obviously it takes code in terms of endpoint security or SIM agents or Go ahead.
But that logic, right? It's like we have spent so much of our time in our lives. Like, and man, I'm going to speak for you. Like, I can't count the amount of correlation searches that I've written in my time, right? The amount of time, it's just like I have these disparate log sources and I need to write it, and you're like, great, it works. And then there's a change. And then you go back to the beginning and you rewrite, and it's annoying. And then a security event happens and you're like, great, I have a search for this. Oh, wait, it no longer works. Or wait, why did I not get detected off of that? Oh, it's because someone in the UI accidentally right-clicked and disabled it or changed it from an every 15-minute interval to every 15-hour interval. And so we missed the breach window or the attack window. So that is my very frustrated way of saying that we need a slightly better way of handling our detections. I think this model of going, this is a fledgling idea. Like it's been around for a couple of years. People kind of been talking about it. I don't think it's a mainstream thing yet. I think we're going to get a little better at it. There is a toolkit that I will think of, and I will double check. The thing is called Sigma, an open source project that kind of started this kind of, let's create a normalized language. So basically the idea is this. We have these log sources that end up in these SIMs, log aggregators or true SIMs. We have the event correlation. They then are exposing the ability to manipulate logs and searches via an API. So the detection of code is really saying, instead of creating your content and leaving it in the UI where someone has to go in and click it, can we not extract that content, that search, commit it to a repository, just like we do everything else, and then via some very basic like CI pipeline, push that content to the SIM platform over an API, but then you have a copy of your search query in your repository. You kind of treat it like a piece of code. Hey, we realize we have a false positive, also known as a bug. Cool, let's do a bug. The team at Palantir did an awesome Medium article on this a couple of years ago, and that's what just like kind of turned my attention to it. And I really liked how they were thinking about it. So I just think this idea of having all of our content sitting in the UI space is limited, it's error prone, versus if we can make it more modular and commit it via the API and have it as code, then we get more flexibility and we get more control over it. And then of course, if someone screws something up, well, if every 5 minutes we're re-pushing and making sure that deterministically ensuring our detections are in a steady state, and someone messes it up, well, it just kind of reverts back to the last known good, which you have in your code repository. So that's the basic idea. It's just to let's bring visibility to it. Let's treat it like an object of code. So we put those engineering practices around it. And then instead of having it in the UI, you put it in the code base. That's my takeaway of it in a nutshell.
Were you gonna go, Brian? Okay. I was gonna say I'm a huge fan of Sigma roles. The whole concept just blew my mind first when I found out about it. I'm like, what? You mean there's like a standard way all of us can look at this. Because before that, everything is vendor agnostic, and you're rewriting the same rules. If you are on this SIM or this detection platform or this, you're rewriting it in different language and redoing work over and over and over again. And that's just an easier way to keep track of things and to just for broader implementation of stuff. They're fantastic.
Yeah, I still get tripped up on the Splunk to Sumo, right? Stats count by in Splunk means one thing, and then in Sumo it just counts by. And like that's like I still am hitting that after all these years of being in both of those. And you're just like, yeah, there's got to be a way to have a common language that we can do. And then you let you let these, in that case, some log aggregators do what they're great at, right? Like they solve this particular niche thing on ML or metrics or whatever, cool. But I'm trying to make sure that when the malware log ends up in my SIM, like it makes it to PagerDuty, like, or I'm like, hey, I got this threat hunting correlation. I want to see if this behavior that strings together, and that just stays consistent. So I think if any blue teamers out there getting started, they should just Google that and just take a look at the Sigma rules. Because you're right, when you realize that you could say, cool, I can take like the MITRE ATT&CK library, hit the export button to my my log vendor of choice, and then just dump it and see what happens. I mean, that's probably the most crude way you could use this tool, but it's a good place to start and see what jumps out at you.
Yeah. So I just realized that all of us, well, except for me, I'm filthy PM, is in the detection business. Mr. Betcher has a tool for detecting things. Amanda's, of course, MSSP, and you're director of security.
No.
You're all
SaaS,
about the detection.
Man. SaaS.
Yeah, it's not MSSP.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wait. So you're a SaaS? What is it?
Software as a service.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Hey, you ship logs and magic happens. Just do little connectors and it's like find all the bad things.
We are done doing MSSP work, man.
Understood. So pay no attention to what's going on behind the curtain. We're just out here to make the magic happen and saw the lady in half.
Despite what our old customers think. That's fine.
Oh. Well, you're innovating, so they can understand. Mr. Betcher, to get you in, make sure we get you on the conversation here. So is detection for you, you deal a lot with detection with malware and such. How does that trickle up to your, other detection environments? Because you work with, Windows specifically, or you work those kinds of issues. What are some of the pain that you have with detection mechanisms? Because like we were talking about with Sigma, unless they're universal or they're compatible, then you have to run them through some kind of filter or something. What are the heartburn you have with detection mechanisms and deciding on whether or not it's actually something that's actionable?
Deciding on what's actionable is probably is one of the, well, at least we can get to that point, right? To where we have a lot of data that we can start filtering things out. That's a good place to be. A lot of companies don't even get there, right? So that's, like I said, that's a good place to be. Now, how do you decide to filter those out? Well, that's a must, because a lot of times organizations will say, okay, let's just log everything and send it up, right? I try to tone that down at the endpoint to get only the actionable things, or the things that are high value. For example, command line logging, right? So log the command line. You don't have to get process kill or any of that kind of stuff, or I made a connection to this thing and then the connection was severed at this point. You may have agents that once you detect something, you can open up the floodgates and then get all that extra data, right? So your SIM isn't overwhelmed with data. Or you can piecemeal it and say, well, these 10 endpoints might be affected, so let me open the floodgates for those 10, right? It's not a place you want to be where everyone is sending everything to your SIM, and then you got to filter through all that data. So, take the thing that's giving you the most pain, or that's taking up the most room in your database, and see if you can trim that down. Maybe you don't need any of it, right? To have some detection. It's a tough question to answer, and it depends on the organization and how to customize it. I mean, that's pretty much the only answer I can give you.
So you said you had a hard stop, Mr. Betcher?
In 20 minutes.
Oh, in 20 minutes. Okay.
Because I'd like to respond to that. I think that is such a cool thing. I'm glad you say that.
Please go ahead,
I mean, there are two things. Like, I couldn't agree with you more that it's about like, what are the use cases you're actually trying to solve for versus like collecting all of the things. And I definitely think that's a huge distinction between I'm going to deem a mature and immature organization, security operations center. And one who says, I don't know, therefore collect everything because one day I might need it. And who knows if I drop that keyword in there, that write log will pop at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'll find my smoking gun. Okay, that has never worked. Like in my experience, like I'm sure others have had other experiences, but like that whole idea, collect all the things, doesn't work. Now, to the audience out there, like the latest, if you're like in a Windows environment and you're trying to figure out process execution, like we were just discussing, the latest versions of Sysmon, like literally, that's so cool. Like they thought about this too. And to your point, they allow us to say what we want to capture and don't capture. Can I take little rules, stick them together? If I see, I'm going to make this one up. It's like Microsoft Word executing PowerShell that makes a network connection. You could take that rule set, push it down, and only when that triggers do I send all that data back up to my SIM. So this idea that like they've kind of done us a favor by democratizing, if I may, a little bit of like the EDR space where we can take that common library, we can write those rules. We don't have to collect all the logs, but to your point, it's just like, let's collect the use cases that we know we need, the metadata around to support that argument, and then pull that back. And then the other kind of thing to that is if you're not in that environment yet, believe, and this is a few years old, but actually 2 years old, the Japanese CERT team, they have released a really good reference on what Windows event IDs to use to solve which use cases. So you don't need to turn on everything in Windows because that's the fastest way to blow up your Splunk license, but you can turn on these 10, 20 window event IDs, and you can solve all these use cases with that data that comes up. So that's another great reference to start with, like, as you were talking about, what are we trying to solve for? What do we need to bring up those use cases? And then let's go collect that information.
And I think Windows does a really good job of logging on the endpoint. So you can turn all the things on the endpoint that you need, like you said, the important things, but just not send them up to your SIM, right? And then you can categorize those particular event IDs and say, okay, if I suspect lateral movement, let me flip this lateral movement bit and start sending all of the 2624s, right?
Yeah.
To my SIM and say, okay, there's my lateral movement, among other things. Or if I suspect that there's a PowerShell exploit going around or somebody's using PowerShell manually, let me send all the PowerShell logs to the SIM. So I flip that bit, right, on a certain number of endpoints. So that's a good way of not sending everything, but it's available there if you need it, so that your agent can then take, okay, I think I got hit 3 days ago. Let me go back 3 days and just send all those logs. And so your SIM is then flooded with 3 days of logs, but it's the right logs, the ones you need, the things that define lateral movement or PowerShell in those examples. You don't have to send everything, just those things that you need in that particular time window.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like a little bit of a script or a little bit of automation right there. It's like, if you see this behavior, then turn on logging really aggressively in these areas and for further analysis. Yeah.
Yep. I think we're the last little bit here I wanted to talk about was detection fatigue, and I'm sure Amanda has this issue and Conor sees it a lot. Is there obviously there is such a thing, but I mean, I'm thinking of the boy who cried wolf. Are there legitimate detection things out there that maybe we shouldn't be logging, or is there a triage method that we should employ to make sure that only like the top 15 are looked at, instead of, oh, well, we need to, monitor, 500 detection, 500 is going to be, either it's going to be false positive, it's going to be false negative, or, how are we, when something real comes along that actually is an indicator of compromise, we won't know it. So how do we tread that line between decision fatigue or detection fatigue and getting real actionable data? And I think we'll start with Amanda, and then we'll go Connor, and then Mr. Betcher last.
Gosh, yeah, there's a lot of stuff you shouldn't log. Gosh, I think maybe. See here, I'll stick to my top couple. I know there's a lot of people that try and log like Windows firewall information that don't actually have it configured.
Oh.
So you can log that all you want. If you don't have it configured to do anything, it's not going to do a whole lot.
Okay.
It's not going to do anything, right?
No.
Are they doing it because of compliance issues or governance?
Maybe.
It's very easy to turn on logging everything.
It
not
is.
Think about it. Yeah.
It is.
Right.
It really is. But what is it? 5156,
58.
58, and is there 44 maybe? Whatever Windows filtering platform connections is, that gives you 0 to no information sometimes if it's not configured.
It's typically 5156 is the one you need, because that'll show you what process made the connection to what.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
That's highly valuable.
Okay. Was that everything, Ms. Berlin?
What else? What else? What was the other question? So what not to log, and then about just fatigue in general.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. It's one of, when people come to us for a solution, anyways, talking like legitimately from Blumira, that's one of the biggest concerns that a lot of people will have, because again, it's really easy to turn on all of the logging for everything, and configuring that for whitelisting can be really difficult. So if you can go down the path of using Sigma rules and trying to weed out stuff in the beginning, like at least if you're implementing your own SIM, it can be really tiring to try and get all of that white noise to go away. We try and do all that kind of stuff on the back end. So I don't know that, like, we don't have alert fatigue now. I mean, kind of on the back end, sometimes we do. And some people do have it just because of compliance that I feel like they're doing incorrectly. We have some people that want to know every time an account is locked out, whether it's a computer or a user. So I don't know. Just also depends on the person.
Yeah.
Some people don't find it annoying and don't think it's overwhelming, but there's no use that you can get out of a lot of that stuff, even if you are getting it all the time.
That makes sense. Okay. All right. Connor, it's up to you. What does this decision fatigue look like, or detection fatigue look like for you?
So there's a reason I have these wrinkles, and I'm a little prematurely. And I got a lot of gray hair, so thankfully you can't see on the audio only podcast. So here's what I'd say. So I think the number one problem when it comes to decision fatigue is this: that when people create detections, they often they should really think of it in a structured framework. I'm very big on frameworks because it really helps us focus and get things right. We were just talking about a second ago, start with your use case and work your way backwards. So for instance, when you're creating a detection, are you trying to detect an adversary in the infrastructure, inside the application, or is it a business logic issue? Like, I think a lot of people are just like, hey, let's go create detections. And so you have this, like, this thing happened inside our business app. Okay, that's bad. And then they jumped over to, we've now recognized that the malware there's something wrong there's a suspicious event going on in the infrastructure. Our Windows environment just spawned PowerShell and it shouldn't have. Our Linux box just made a connection to somewhere and it shouldn't have, right? So separate all of those out and then measure their effectiveness accordingly, right? So look at what is your detection library for detects in your infrastructure. If you're a company that is a SaaS company and you're putting code on the internet and this is how you realize your value as a company, great. What are the things that are happening inside the application? Do you have exploit attempts? Do you have people attempting to upload malicious scripts, whatever the case may be? What does that look like? And look at that, but keep it distinct from your infrastructure. And then your third one is your business logic. You might have a very valid user who shows up into your software environment and they perform fraud. Like, you're not going to find that if you're looking at infrastructure and application. So that's a business logic issue. So I would say separate all three of those and then build one alert at a time and make sure you've got metrics for the alert before you go live. This is the idea, go back to detection as code. If it goes live, how do you measure its effectiveness? How many false positives is it raising? How much time do you spend babysitting that detection, and should you just nuke it and start over again? Right. So let's just start by saying, okay, let's put a framework of having those three that are distinctly separate. And if we start with that and then we put the metrics in place, I think that's how we start to solve the fatigue issue. And then we have to always remember that if you're a SOC manager, if you're a security manager, that a human on your team is receiving this alert. And so you've really just got to protect the human on the other side of this. And that might mean that you need to invest in a SOAR platform. It also might mean that you need better detections. It might mean that you need to outsource who's doing your detections because you just want them doing the analysis and the response to those detections. And then I'll leave you this last other piece here. Separate out what is the difference between a signal that you're going to respond to and an alert, an enrichment that's going to give you context, and then a dashboard that you might use during an investigation. So those three things should be separate, and you shouldn't try and trigger a notification into your Slack, into your PagerDuty for all of them, right? They're very specific use cases. So now flip that on its head. What I just said, I just gave you a 3x3 matrix, right? Are you in the business? Are you in the infrastructure, in the application, or the business layer logic? And then are you creating a signal, an enrichment, or a dashboard? What are your metrics for that 9x9 grid? I think that is a framework in which I would try to start to solve the decision fatigue alert fatigue.
Fantastic.
Yeah, because if something's just a risk, you don't want to know about that in the middle of the night.
No, come back to tomorrow morning. You're not going to, if you can't remediate at 2 o'clock in the morning, why alert at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Yep.
Very cool. All right. Mr. Betcher, anything to add there? Anything you'd
Wow,
like to...
I don't know if I can top that. I'd just like to add to it a little bit on some of the new stuff that's coming out. So let's say you've got your framework and you're doing good, you're mature, right? And something new pops up, like somebody publishes a malware report and it says, well, we found this new adversary and they use this particular technique. Make sure that your detections allow you to detect that technique. Now, this is probably going to be a severity 1 if it happens, right? And you need to practice that particular trigger. For example, as Conor, I think you mentioned what did you say? A Word doc executes VB script or PowerShell you mentioned, and then makes a connection to the internet. Those types of things like that, when you see that in a malware report, you should be able to detect that series of events, right? And alert on it and be able to respond to it.
Yeah, I love that behavior versus event. If you see a behavior, that's a much stronger signal than if you just find a discrete event. PowerShell is executed. Okay, well, actually, what was the whole chain and with PowerShell in the middle?
Right.
You have very different context, yeah, to your point.
Right. So during our discussion here, Conor asked Amanda thoughts on MITRE Shield. What is MITRE Shield?
You guys don't know about this? It is the coolest thing since the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I am so excited about the MITRE Shield.
Well, shoot, tell us a little bit about that before we leave, and maybe we can have you come back in a couple of months or so and do another show all about that.
In the same way that MITRE ATT&CK gave us as the industry a framework of reference that allowed us to have an organizing principle, an organizing conversation about what are the adversaries doing, give us a kill chain, the one walkthrough, and a sense of like where we are, right? So it gave us a map and a framework, and people could start building against that. Now, what MITRE has done is flipped on its head and said, okay, what if you're a blue teamer and you're trying to have visibility and observability in order to detect that? So they're looking at what are your points of observability? What are your containment and response actions that you could perform in that? And then you measuring your maturity against it. Like every framework, there are always edge cases that fall off, and it's not meant to capture everything. But I felt, again, here is something where the MITRE ATT&CK has understood the security community. And so the MITRE teams have understood the security community. They gave us MITRE, which was on the red team side. Oh, goodness. They gave us the attack framework, which was on the red team side. And now they've given us Shield, which is on the blue team side. And this is the ability to say, do we have the right visibility, the right observability, and the right containment and response actions across the kill chain, so that when somebody arrived, we're ready and poised and good to go for that response. And if I remember correctly, the URL is shield.mitre.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah,
So same as attack.mitre.
What annoys me is the fact that I was going through and doing something like this, and I had actually registered the domain. Exploit DB. So I had registered defense-db.com, and I was going to make like an exploit DB, but for blue team stuff that mapped to MITRE. And then maybe a week after I registered the domain name, they came out with that.
Oh, dang.
I'm like, all right, you guys probably did it better because you have an entire team working on it.
Exactly.
But I guess I just didn't go at it fast enough.
Well, maybe
it's a genius idea, though.
You wouldn't be the first person to fork something that, maybe didn't work for you, or you wanted to add something. You wouldn't be the first.
No, it's fine. I don't have enough time for that stuff. I'll just let them do it, and I'll use it.
It's like we all recognize the problem. We're just like, if I can have 36 hours in a day, I might be able to contribute to the solution.
Exactly.
That's right. Yep. Very cool. All right. Well, I don't know. Last thoughts. I know Mr. Betcher's got a hard stop here in a few minutes. Conor, we'll go ahead with you, and then we'll go with Mr. Betcher and Ms. Berlin to finish it up. Any final thoughts?
I have just so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you all. Like, it is so nice to be able to come nice, high executive conversation right down to the weeds. And we're talking about event IDs, and then we're back up again talking about frameworks. So it's a really amazing and unique thing you guys have here. And I love the fact you have this show. And again, just thank you so much for having me on today.
Appreciate it. All right. And of course, we can find you on the Confident Defense podcast, confidentdefense.com/podcast. And go check that out if you want to have yet another podcast to listen to. So I've got, a bunch more for my walks on a regular basis. Cool. Ms. Berlin, any last thoughts?
Nope. you can find me at InfoSyster on Twitter, INFOSYSTIR.
Right on. All right, Mr. Betcher.
Defense is very difficult. It's a very challenging, but it's also fun if you get in the right environment and you build these things. I mean, I like building things right from scratch, hopefully, but I could also tear things down and build some new things, right? It's very challenging, but that's why that's what draws me to it, right? So yeah, if you like a challenge, this is where it's at.
Yep, it's interesting. We're starting to see more blue team tools because people, I think, are starting to acknowledge the fact that blue. It's
nothing like those easy red team jobs that are out there.
Yeah, run some Metasploit.
They just got to get it once, right? They just got to get, we're done. Here's your report, we win. And you're like, well, wait, but you didn't do all the other stuff that I was offending against. It's like, so it's hard.
What's your email so all the red team hate can go to you, Conor?
No thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, if people wanted to reach out to you, Conor, how would they?
Thank you. So? The best way to do this would be on LinkedIn. So we'll drop in the show notes, but it's Conor D as in David Sherman. So Conor D Sherman on LinkedIn. You guys can find me there. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's gonna be the podcast, which is on YouTube and Spotify. There's the strategic one that we have on a weekly basis, and then there's the tactical one we have with Insights with my co-host James Chiappetta, who is an AppSec wunderkind. It just blows my mind. I learn so much every time, and that's why he's on the podcast. So I would say start there. Love to connect with people on LinkedIn. Love to continue the conversation. And if you, and the podcast as well, is where we're putting a lot of my time and energy at the moment.
Awesome. Okay, great. We're going to get out of here real quick. Follow the Brakesec Podcast at Brakesec on Twitter, Brakesec. You can follow me on Twitter at Brian Brake, BryanBrake. Appreciate all of our fans for spreading the word about the podcast, likes, stars, reviews, whatever. We're on every major podcast platform, including now we're on the Amazon podcast or Audible or whatever the hell they're calling it. There's a link in the show notes to that. You can go to breakingsecurity.com and check all that out. That's BRAKEING security.com. Thank you to our patrons for their continued generosity and support. The podcast is always free, but we appreciate those folks that want to help us out with, ancillary support, being, Zoom, domain hosting, etc. And we're really thankful for that extra support there. We have a TPub store. Again, you can find that on the breakingsecurity.com in our show notes. You can buy t-shirts. You can still get Miss Berlin's face on a t-shirt. She's laughing as I say that because it never gets old. It's still fun to see that, even if we're not in meat space yet. Go get the gift that keeps on giving, and that would be Miss Berlin's face on a t-shirt. So,
yep.
Cool. So, I guess that's it for Breaking Down Security this week. Take care of yourself. Be kind to one another. It's getting harder and harder as we head towards the end of the year. Take care of yourself because you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.
And we're done. Cool.
I voted this
man.
morning.
We're getting ours in the mail in the next couple days. So, cool. Yeah. We do have another podcast. I think we can just specifically talk about IR playbooks. So that's cool. We kind of, I realized about, 20 minutes in, we're like, yeah, we're going to go beyond playbooks at this point, more of an organizational kind of thing, which is great because it leaves us more options for shows. Yeah, Conor, thank you so much for coming. I like talking at a high level with this. I was actually looking at eZCater to see if there were jobs available online. Not for me specifically.
Uh-huh.
Well, you let me know when Bob needs a job. You talk to me about Bob.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, Bob. Okay. Bob is a security PM, and he's looking to do more security PM and process improvement across the board or at an organizational level. So, Bob is in a weird space. He wants to continue doing security, but there's a lot of room for process improvement in the security space.
So
it's just nobody's hiring.
I totally get it. You're going to love this conversation I've got coming up in a couple of weeks. He's a very senior PM, product manager, and he's talking about bringing agile processes to a security organization. How do you make your security org agile and working inside that environment? So
nice. Okay.
Shameless plug. Just yeah.
Right on. No, I did some training recently for organizational change management. So from ProSci, and I'm seeing a lot of parallels there and a lot of things for maturing organizations as a whole. So I definitely will grab that and listen to it. I don't know how much product experience, but yeah, it's like if you're not a product manager for security, then you've pretty much pigeonholed yourself. So I'm trying to branch out a little bit, but yeah, Conor, appreciate you coming on. Mr. Betcher, I know you've got to go. So thank you all for, taking the time. Go ahead.
Did want to say one thing for Amanda. Amanda, since you have this incredibly awesome book that you published a while back, would you like to come onto the Confident Defense podcast and talk about you and your book?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I could probably get Lee to come on too, if you want.
That would
my
be
co-author.